My name is Kevin. I wanted a divorce because my wife married me under her parents' pressure, but she always wanted to marry a rich businessman. I begged her, promising to work day and night to fulfill all her dreams, but she refused. I gave her a divorce and then married a teacher. My first wife married a businessman. My second wife, the teacher, educated me, and after years of hard work, I became a government officer. One day at work, my peon was pushing a woman out of the office harshly. I felt sorry for her and approached, only to have her grab my feet and beg. Then she handed me a letter, and I recognized her face. I used to work as a laborer with a mechanic. My hands would get cut, my clothes and face covered in dust and sweat. People pitied me and sometimes insulted me, but I cared only about one thing, that when I came home, my wife would smile, welcome me, give me water, and serve food. Her smile would wipe away all my fatigue. But when I reached home, she would turn her face away, acting like a stranger, never talking, and when she did, it felt like poison was pouring out of her mouth. She said she was disgusted by a sweaty laborer like me, that the smell of my sweat and breath made her feel faint. Her words shattered me, but I remained silent, hoping things would change with time. Instead, things worsened. She hated everything about me and avoided me, yet I never got angry. I always looked at her with love and never raised my hand against her. I consoled myself that maybe things would get better since I was lucky to have such a wise and educated wife. But daily insults continued, and I lived each day hoping for a change. My pockets were often empty, sometimes having just $100 or less, yet I tried to bring her small gifts, fruits, clothes, cheap bangles, or her favorite snacks, but she was never pleased or appreciative. She told me to give such things to a street woman like me, not to her. I was breaking inside, like wood eaten away by termites, but I couldn't share my pain. Who would listen or understand a laborer's feelings? One day coming home, a child held my hand and ran, hugging his father, who was dressed cleanly and arrived in a white car. Seeing them made tears come to my eyes because I had a wife I loved who didn't want to live with me. Sometimes I wondered why I was enduring all this. Was it my duty to carry this burden just because I was married? But then hope struck me that maybe she would change, maybe she'd soften and say someday, "You are my husband, my world, I understand your sacrifices." That thought kept me alive, but every day, she turned her face away when she saw me. The house felt suffocating, and she insulted my sweat and breath. A small part of me died each day. One day I came home with groceries, sweaty and dusty, and she was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. When I tried to speak, she said sharply, "How many times have I told you to give me a divorce? How long will this farce continue?" Hearing this stopped my breath. I closed my eyes, hoping I misheard, but those words had become my daily reality. I begged for time, promising to fix everything and make her happy, but she laughed cruelly, calling me a laborer who works in garbage all day and saying even street dogs are cleaner. That day, I felt completely shattered. I remembered the first time I saw her in simple blue clothes with a sweet smile and vowed to make her my queen, never letting her suffer. But now, the queen wanted a divorce, as if I were a punishment she wanted to be free from. I gave her small surprises, cheap jewelry, movie tickets, food from the market, but she remained silent, only throwing taunts the next day and demanding a divorce because I was not good enough for her. Once, I knelt at her feet, telling her I loved her, couldn't live without her, begging her to just look into my eyes and say if I was worthless so I could leave. She was silent for a moment, then picked up her phone, said yes, and I realized she was still crying over someone else. I didn't know whether to respect her or just leave her life forever. She kept insulting me, and I silently listened, every word piercing my heart like an arrow. She was talking to someone else was in her life, probably the reason she wanted a divorce. My hands trembled, but I said nothing. That night, for the first time, I questioned God, why is this happening? Why am I humiliating myself for a woman who looks at me with hatred? The only answer was silence. I told myself, the decision is yours, but I won't complain. The next day, after a painful day of labor, she again demanded a divorce, threatening court. I bowed my head and begged for a few more days. She grabbed my shirt collar and said, "Who do you think you are? I'm afraid of people like you, born only to work, never deserving respect or love, just a burden." At that moment, something inside me broke. I looked into her eyes, tears in mine but fire in my heart. She went to her room and slammed the door. I sat outside, starving and thirsty, staring at the wall, wondering where I went wrong or if this was just my fate, that the woman I loved hurt me the most. Yet I refused to give up. I endured every insult, every divorce demand, hoping God would have mercy, that maybe she'd change, or I'd change myself. I only knew I had accepted her and would remain hers no matter what, even if she broke me every day, because I was the man willing to bear all the world's pain just to see a woman smile. One hot day, sweaty and carrying 2 bags, potatoes in one hand, a water bag in the other, I was going home after work, hoping maybe today she'd be different, maybe she wouldn't mention divorce. Suddenly, a white car passed with its windows down, laughter flowing out. I looked, heart stopped. The back seat held my wife, Amanda, her face bright, eyes sparkling, smiling like I had never seen before. With her was a young man in clean clothes, who was talking and making her laugh. That joy was new to me. With me, her face always held anger and hatred. My hand loosened, the bag slipped, potatoes scattered. People shouted and pushed, but I just watched the car go by as if time had stopped. That moment stabbed my heart like a knife. She was with someone else, and I was just an unwanted part of her life she wanted to end. I quietly gathered my things and went home, trembling. The door was open, she was there as always, casually sitting, busy on her phone. I took off my shoes and went inside silently. I took a blank paper and pen, my hands shaking but my heart calm, a strange peace I felt, like a burden lifting. I said, "I will give you a divorce," and wrote with my own hands that I had always loved Amanda and always would, but now she was no longer in my heart. I handed her the paper and said, "I'm letting you go. Divorce papers will come tomorrow, you can sign and leave if you want." The words I'd been avoiding came out by themselves. She was shocked, asked what it was. I said, "This is my heart's truth, your freedom." She read it and laughed, saying I'd always love her and that she couldn't believe I was really leaving. She thought I was pretending, but when I said I'd bring the papers tomorrow seriously, she nodded, happy for a moment. Then she got up, opened her wardrobe, took a small bag, and began packing silently, as if waiting for this release, as if freed from captivity. I sat quietly, feeling empty, like nothing was left inside me. She turned, said only, "Why didn't you do this earlier?" and closed the door. I sat in silence, the walls echoing her voice, "Give me a divorce, I hate you, you're nothing." Everything had ended. I lay down, eyes closed, a hollow silence inside me. My eyes felt dry, as if even crying was impossible. There was peace in that I had broken her who had broken me so many times, but also a void, as if I lost something very close. For days, I spoke to no one, stayed silent at work, smiled when asked, but inside I was dead. Time moved on, and I promised myself I would change, no longer a laborer, but someone people couldn't look down upon. The hands that once carried bricks would now hold a pen. I had given Amanda the divorce, but it wasn't my defeat, it was my new beginning. I didn't cry or fall apart, I gathered myself and told God, "Now you are my only support." That was the moment the spark inside me decided to become a fire. The night had grown deep, and I was sitting on the roof. Everything changed now. She was gone. The woman who lived in my heart, for whom I endured the world's insults and ruined myself just to see her smile, was now out of my life. Along with her, a weak, broken, helpless man inside me had also left. I looked up at the sky and silently promised myself that I would no longer be the man trampled under everyone's feet every day. I would change, rise from laborer to officer, earn respect, money, status, everything. This wasn't some movie dream, it was the cry inside me, the years of humiliation, wounds, and pain flowing as lava in the form of harsh words, which I had been letting flow unchecked. The next day, I bought old CSS exam notes from a dusty bookstore, pages thick with years of neglect, but to me, they were treasure. I bent over them like a hungry man over food. My new life was labor by day, study by night. My body ached from carrying bricks, my shoulders hurt and legs swelled, but at night, with a cup of tea, I would study with burning eyes, words blurring but my heart never ready to give up. Sometimes sleep would overwhelm me and my head would fall on the book, but morning would come and I'd start again. Time seemed frozen, my world reduced to labor and dreams. People around laughed, calling me crazy for preparing for CSS, a laborer wanting to become an officer. They mocked me, but I only smiled silently, no replies, no hurt feelings, because I had no time for that. I had only time to change myself. Often at night, I climbed the roof, stared at the sky, telling myself one day I would leave this place, one day my nameplate would hang on an office door, and those who mocked me would call me sir. Days passed. I cut back on food, bought books instead of clothes. For the first time after marriage, I started paying attention to myself, gathering my heart and mind, recalling everything I'd learned in school but never truly used. Whenever a thick book scared me, I remembered Amanda's laughter with another in the car. That fire in my bones pushed me back to the books. My mother, seeing my condition, silently began leaving dinner for me at night, praying without words, and maybe it was her prayers that gave me strength. One day, I went to submit my CSA application form. The clerk asked if it was my first time. I said, "No, life is giving me this chance." He looked at me oddly, but I didn't care. I was no longer running from myself but running to build myself. That day was a storm inside me. I was neither forgotten nor tired, every day a new effort, every night a new resolve. I knew the path was tough, but the end would be bright. I was a laborer, yes, but now my dream was that one day people would admire my hard work, courage, and transformation. I would answer every insult with my success. And just like that night, whenever I get tired, I look at the sky and promise myself I've changed, and there's no turning back. Before the sun fully rose, I stood by the wall, carrying a bucket of mortar on my shoulder, fingers raw, joints aching, legs swollen, but with a strange strength inside. After work, I brushed off dirt with my feet, took a sip of water, changed my clothes, ate my mother's food, and sat down on the cot with books. Sometimes I nodded off, but as my head drooped, an inner voice urged me to win, not sleep, and I rubbed my eyes and dove back into studies. My life was caught between long, exhausting days of labor and merciless nights of study. No time to go anywhere, no time for friends, no TV, no phone, only cement and books remained. People laughed when they heard I was preparing for CSS, mocking how a laborer could become an officer. I smiled silently, because the mind is everything. One day, after work, I visited the old bookstore again. An elderly man recognized me and asked if I needed anything special. I said I wanted old CSS papers. He was silent a moment, then brought out a pile of books, telling me to take them and never give up. Those words became my blessing. Every day I started a new topic, made questions, wrote answers, repeated them until my hands trembled, then closed my eyes and pictured myself sitting at a desk, signing files as an officer. That dream was stronger than sleep. My mother often woke at midnight to find me sitting on the cot, head resting on a book, eyes closed in focus. She left me milk without a word, only a gentle hand on my head, her blessings giving me strength. Many times, when I couldn't understand the language of a book, I would spend hours searching for meanings because I had no teacher, no tutor, only my own will and God's help. I listened to old lectures on YouTube, made notes, pasted charts on the walls. My room became my battlefield. When money ran out, I skipped meals to pay fees, sold an old bicycle, borrowed from friends, but I never wanted to be a burden. This was my battle, and I wanted to win it alone. Once, while looking at books in the market, an old acquaintance laughed and said, "Books? Now you'll become an officer? Your mind is all right, huh?" I looked up and said, "The mind is everything." He laughed and then walked away, but a fire had ignited in my heart. That very night, I decided that if I ever met him again, I would show him my success and the reality of my dream, and that day would surely come. Winter nights grew long, hands would freeze, and the body would shiver, but even wrapped in a quilt, I studied. In summers, mosquitoes bit, fans were absent, and I studied drenched in sweat. I was never afraid of circumstances, only of defeat. Many times, I felt like giving up, but my heart urged me on. After enduring so many insults and pain, how could I stop now? So I kept studying. Time passed, days turned into weeks, weeks into months, but my mindset, endurance, and effort began to change, and most importantly, my belief grew stronger. I no longer cared about people's mockery because I needed my own belief, and that belief, that dream inside me, was fully alive. I knew the journey was long and hard, but one day I would reach my destination because I wasn't just dreaming, I was living it. The sun had risen, but my room was still dark, curtains hung down, books scattered on the bed, and I sat silently in a corner. The old notice board in front of me had big letters saying, "Success is the other name of hard work," but that phrase now felt like a taunt because I had failed. For the first time, my dream shattered along with my heart. When the results came, I opened the list with trembling hands, read every roll number, reached the end, but mine was nowhere to be found. It felt like someone stabbed me in the heart, my breath caught, and my eyes welled up. My mother asked, "Son, what happened?" I just said, "Nothing, just luck didn't wake up today." That night I couldn't sleep, lying on the bed staring at the ceiling with one question in my heart: am I really not capable? Is everything okay except me? But then the same stubborn voice inside said, "You're not the man who gives up." This was just the first blow, the whole war is still ahead. I pulled myself together, closed the results list, cleaned my room, and rehung the notice board for new preparation. After a few days of silence, I started waking up at the same time, going to work, and studying in the evenings. I turned failure into a lesson. When I filled the form the second time, I felt a strange strength in my heart, as if this time I didn't just want to succeed but wanted to defeat all the past wounds and pains. This was no longer just an exam, it was my war. The day the results were announced again, I took the whole day off from work and went straight to a friend's mobile shop with a computer. My heart pounded loudly, almost bursting out of my chest, my sweaty hands trembling. I opened the website, entered my roll number, closed my eyes, and prayed with all my heart that if I lost again, I wouldn't have the courage to stand up anymore. Just let me win today. I opened my eyes, looked at the screen, and time seemed to stop. My roll number was on the list. My eyes widened in disbelief. I checked again and again, and there it was, I had passed. I was successful. At first, I couldn't believe it, then my heart raced faster, and I shouted loudly, thanking God that I had passed. My friend ran up to me and asked what happened, and I grabbed his hand saying, "I've become an officer, I'm now an assistant commissioner." Then tears came, tears mixed with laughter. They weren't just tears of joy but of all those sleepless nights, all the insults, all the humiliation, the days I fell to the ground and no one helped me. Those tears were flowing in my victory. I left the shop and went straight to the temple to pray, crying and thanking God for listening to my prayers and giving me the position I had once only feared to dream of. That day, I wasn't just a laborer's son, I had become an example. A few days later, I was called for training. When I was given my uniform, tears filled my eyes. It wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was the reality of my dream. I looked in the mirror and silently said, "Look, the same hands that used to carry bricks will now sign files." When I entered the office for the first time, people saluted me, pulled out a chair for me, offered tea, and I began to laugh quietly at myself. Time had changed, and those who once dismissed me were now respecting me. When my mother came to the office, I sat her in the very chair that was mine. She placed her hand on my head, proud tears in her eyes. I was now the man who didn't just dream but made it come true. I had become an assistant commissioner, and this victory belonged not just to me but to every person who faces mockery yet never stops dreaming. My car moved slowly on the road. The driver opened the door. I stepped out wearing my uniform, chest held high, pride on my forehead. The sunlight glittered on the car window as if time itself was saluting me. Behind me stood my mother in a sari, eyes moist but a peaceful smile on her face that had been missing for years. I pointed to the door and said, "Mom, this is the very station where I worked as a laborer." She was silent for a moment, then softly said, "You didn't just raise yourself but raised me too, son." I stepped forward and touched the wall of the station, the same bricks, the same place, only now I was not a laborer but an officer of this city. There was a time I sat on this wall drinking water, soaked in sweat and pain. Today, I stood there in uniform, head held high, people coming up to salute me. The same people who once ignored me as a laborer were now honoring me, telling me to ask if I needed anything. I just smiled because I needed no service from anyone, I just had to uphold their respect. Media came with cameras and microphones, asking, "Sir, your journey is very impressive. Did you ever think a laborer could become an officer?" I said, "I only dreamed the dream that steals sleep, that wakes you up at night, that makes the tiredness of the day restless. I dreamed that dream, and today you see the proof of my hard work." Mom silently watched everything, tears rolling down her cheeks but with happiness shining on her face. I held her hand and said, "Mom, if today I have become an officer, it's because of your prayers and blessings, otherwise, the world would have only seen me as a laborer." We returned home to our own house, white walls, blue curtains, a bright courtyard, air-conditioned rooms, and a kitchen, all special for Mom. One night, I sat by the window. Outside, there was silence. Life had changed. I was no longer the person who lived listening to people's talks. Now I answered my success through my duty. This wasn't just success, it was my revenge. Earlier, my hands held bricks, now files. Once there was sweat smell, now fragrance. Once people changed their paths to avoid me, now they followed me around. All this was by God's grace and my mother's blessings. I was no longer the quiet, crying man. Now I watched silently and perhaps told myself, "Look, everything has changed." At work, people respected me. Some staff were those who used to laugh at me during my labor days, and now they didn't speak without my permission in meetings. I pitied them because I had found peace, not revenge. One day, I put my uniform in the wardrobe and went alone to the same market where I first saw Emma with her boyfriend. That scene was gone, but in my heart it echoed still. I wondered if she would recognize me now. Probably not, because my face no longer bore wounds but peace. The journey wasn't easy, but I learned that the world judges you by your condition, God judges you by your intention, and when God lifts you, the world bows down automatically. I changed myself not just for respect, but because I wanted pride in myself. Now, when I wear my uniform, sit in my chair, and review files, a calm fills me, not just the calm of achievement but of justice. I was once a laborer, now an officer. This is not just a story, it's the truth. If your faith is alive, no force can stop you. Leaving the past behind, I stood at the door of a new life. My second marriage was simple, with family and friends blessing us. My eyes were downcast, but my heart was free. My second wife, Mary, sat in front of me, beautiful, and I silently said she was the woman I would respect because she respected me. When we first sat together after marriage, her voice had innocence and love I never had before. She said, "I know you've been through a lot, but now we just need to be each other's support." I looked up at her, her words were true. She never questioned me, only stood by me. My days began with prayer and ended with her sweet words. I was happy. Once I lived with taunts, now I breathed under the shade of love. For the first time, a woman was proud of my work. When I came home, she welcomed me at the door, handed me a glass of water, and smiled, wiping away the day's fatigue. I remembered that love is silent and true. One day, I told her, "You are the part of my life washing away my past troubles." She replied, "Don't remember the past. If it hadn't happened, maybe we wouldn't be." I was silent because her words had so much depth that I forgot all pain. She was educated and wise, but now not just my wife, she was my companion and my prayer answered. We often sat together at night, drinking tea, talking, and I silently thanked her. Our home atmosphere had changed, filled with happiness. One day, Mom whispered in my ear, "Son, what some get by luck is like your wife. The woman who left was your test of patience, the one who came is your reward." I often wondered if I would have peace if the first woman hadn't left, but the answer was no, because some people come into our lives just to test our patience, others to bless us. Now, when I returned from work and she cared for my clothes and asked about my day, a wave of peace ran through me. Her eyes always held love. Seeing the blisters on my hands, she never hated but always loved me. She knew where I came from and where I had reached, and that was enough. We both gave life a new color. I was not just her husband but her companion, and she was not just my wife but the answer to my prayers. We never fought, thankfully. We had forgotten past pains. People always praised my wife, and I smiled proudly because I knew she was the light that brightened my life. One day I asked her, "If I become weak, will you support me?" She said, "I am here to walk with you, not ahead or behind." Such words are read in books, but in my life, they had become reality. The woman who left had broken me, but the one who came had made me whole again, gently and lovingly. I who was once broken was now complete because my partner was a woman proud of my success, who embraced my past and was happy with my present. One afternoon, I was sitting at my desk signing government files when the gatekeeper came and said, "Sir, a woman is here. She looks desperate and hungry." I nodded and said, "Let her come in, let's hear her out." Moments later, she entered slowly, tired, wearing filthy clothes, looking like a beggar. She stopped before me and folded her hands. I glanced at her face. To me, she was a helpless woman seeking a job. I had just started writing notes. Then suddenly she spoke, her voice soft and trembling, saying, "Don't you recognize me?" At that moment, My hand froze as our eyes met. I looked at her closely, a heavy silence fell. Then she said, "I am your wife, your first wife." The pen slipped from my hand, and my heart felt crushed. I looked again, her face was the same, but time had etched hardship all over it, her cheeks sunken, lips dry, her color faded. The woman who once saw me as worthless, who thought I was nothing but dirt, now stood before me with folded hands, asking for a job. I was speechless. Memories flooded back, the moment she demanded a divorce, telling me she was disgusted by someone like me, a laborer. Now, that same woman stood humbly asking for mercy. Her voice weakened as she pleaded for forgiveness, admitting how life had beaten her down and she had gone days without food. I felt stunned. My chair, uniform, and title suddenly seemed meaningless. I was just a broken man facing another broken soul. Silently, I opened the drawer, took out an envelope of money, and placed it on the table, but she refused, saying she wasn't begging but wanted work to live with dignity. I told the office assistant to give her a job, any kitchen cleaning or simple work, but treat her with respect. As she turned to leave, she glanced back, apologizing for the pain she caused, admitting her pride had blinded her, and asked for forgiveness. I said nothing, only stood and looked out the window, recalling that painful moment when I divorced her, then broken, now everything had changed. The room was silent except for the beating of my heart and the shadows of past memories stirring inside. My new life was bright, old memories faded. I closed my eyes and told myself that the woman who left me was a test, but the woman in my life now was my destiny. A heartbreaking decision always has such an outcome. I was the same man who endured everything, but now I had the strength both to take revenge and to forgive. I chose forgiveness because some wounds are answered with silence, and some stories find peace only in calm, not in victory. Standing by the window, the sun shone fiercely outside while a coolness lingered inside me, a silent fire burning. Then the door gently opened, she came in, the same woman, my first wife Sarah, who once was my life but now seemed like a shadow. My body froze, my eyes locked onto her face, which once held pride but now sought forgiveness, eyes filled with tears and shame. We stood in silence as time seemed to stop. No noise, only the sound of our hearts beating. She looked up to speak but no words came. I quickly reached for a glass of water and handed it to her shaking hands. She sipped slowly as silent tears rolled down her cheeks, only apologies seemed to pass her lips. Today, there were no complaints, no bitterness, no harsh words, not because I forgot, but because I had reached a place where revenge wasn't necessary. Silence spoke louder. I took out the job file, called the assistant, and told him to keep her inside as staff, give her enough work to survive but treat her with respect and no harshness. She stood quietly, knowing this was her punishment and forgiveness. No love remained, only silence. She softly said she wasn't here to ask for anything, just a chance to live, which I had given. My heart stirred, but I wore a calm face. I was no longer weak or broken, I was fully alive. A winner speaks less and thinks more. Before leaving, she looked back once more, maybe hoping I'd say something, maybe to open the door to a relationship again, but I stayed silent. She was the woman whose one word once shattered me. Now I was strong enough that even her tears couldn't change my decision. Her steps led outside, leaving behind a story that had begun with love but ended in silence. Sitting by the window, the sun began to set. She was gone, yet her presence lingered in the room, woven into every breath, not a burden, but a memory. I opened the files again, trying to stay busy because life doesn't stop, and I never looked back. That woman was no longer at my door, she was buried behind me, and now I lived with everything. Respect, peace, love, and above all, a success she never saw in me. The story had changed completely. After dinner, I sat in the courtyard under a sky dotted with soft clouds and a calming breeze. My wife Emily sat beside me, placing a cup of tea down. She was quiet for a moment, then gently said, "I know what happened at your office today." I looked down without explanation. She continued, "What you did was humanity. Maybe someone else would have rejected her or humiliated her with her past, but you quietly extended your hand, the same hand that once thought her worthless." For a moment, everything inside me seemed to end. I looked at Emily, who met my eyes with pride. I bowed my head softly, knowing I didn't want revenge. I only wanted to prove something to myself. Silence hung between us as I took a sip of tea and stared out into the darkness where only shadows remained. Life had given me many wounds, but today the healing balm sat right in front of me, my wife, a gift of my patience and a prayer for my peace. I hadn't shared everything that had passed through my heart with her, yet she understood it all, and that was enough. When my first wife, Jessica, came to the office, my second wife, Olivia, watched everything from the kitchen doorway. She saw the fear in Jessica's eyes, the kind that time etches, and realized that love had become meaningless words. That night after dinner, as we all sat together, Olivia said, "Some people don't stay with us because they're selfish. They test us, teach us lessons, then leave." I quietly replied that sometimes people come late into our lives but stay forever. She smiled. The room was dark, lit only by a small bulb, and that night I saw both faces of my life, one that left me in pride, claiming my humiliation as her right, and the other that silently healed my wounds, held my hand, and walked with me without complaints. I didn't want revenge because I understood life settles its own scores. The woman who divorced me, broken by fate's harsh blows, returned to my door, now loyal and the lady of my home, the companion of my heart, blessed by a higher power. This was no drama or story, it was a reality, a life lesson taught by time. I had told myself that revenge isn't what you inflict on others, it's when you reach a place where you don't need anyone. Everything had changed for me, my decision, my dignity, my peace, and I had found it all. Sometimes when everyone sleeps, I sit alone on the rooftop, look at the sky, and remember those moments when I felt ashamed, when only darkness remained except for one light, faith, that I held close to my heart. Today that faith has become my success. After learning everything, I say only this: time that comes to break you also binds you, you just need to master endurance. Peace and respect aren't found in revenge, victory, or pride. I remain silent, but my silence testifies that I have won, bringing the peace I dreamed of the day a woman told me she was disgusted by someone like me, a laborer. The evening faded at the office, light from the window spilled inside as I closed the last file on my desk. Silence filled the room, outside noises had softened. Jessica stood at the door, eyes downcast, no plea in her gaze. Our eyes met, and I looked away because I no longer wanted to meet her gaze. Our bond was over, now my relationship belonged to my wife. There was no need to look at Jessica anymore. I had already shown her all the sympathy I could. I walked out of my office while she watched me with moist eyes. She still works there, but only as a cleaner. I have reserved the title of wife for Olivia, and I am very happy with her. Friends, I hope you liked our story. If you did, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you get the latest updates first.